Poilievre, seconded by Mr. Nader, moves that the House has no confidence in the Prime Minister and the government.
This will be a carbon tax referendum, a carbon tax election.
The Conservatives are very much thinking about power. I'm thinking about how we can best help Canadians.
We're not going to let the leader of the Conservatives call the shots.
Alors nous, c'est laissons la chance.
There will be other chances to bring down the government.
Conservatives have tabled their non-confidence motion against the Liberal government, but without support from the rest of the opposition, it's set to fail in a vote tomorrow. Still, Conservatives don't plan to stop their push for a snap election, and the Bloc Québécois is threatening to vote with the Conservatives if seniors don't get more money. Here to discuss the state of play, Kevin Lamoureux is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader, and Heather McPherson is the NDP Foreign Affairs critic and party whip. We did ask for MPs from the Conservative Party and the Bloc Québécois to join this panel. The Bloc replied that no one was available today, and we didn't hear back from the Conservatives. But Mr. Lamoureux, Ms. McPherson, it's good to have you here. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be with you.
Kevin Lamoureux, unless you and a bunch of your colleagues vote with the Conservatives, this is likely to be defeated tomorrow. I don't know if you have no confidence in your government, but we could see yet another non-confidence motion coming on Thursday, just right after this. I mean, how confident are you in the strength of your government to last what appears to be a series of persistent tests?
Well, it's from my perspective, I look at it and I say, I loved what it is that the government house leader said earlier. If you really give this some deep thought, what you'll find is this confidence is more of a confidence vote on Pierre Poilievre than it is on the government. He is so much focused, and his thirst for power is so real that at the end of the day, he's more concerned about the Conservative Party and himself than he is about Canadians. And as the Prime Minister has clearly said, we need to be working for Canadians as opposed to playing these type of political games that we have seen today and previously, even last week. The filibustering that's taking place to prevent any form of legislation from ultimately getting into a committee stage. It's ridiculous. They need to start focusing on what Canadians have to say and they're doing and serving Canadians. That's why we're here.
So Heather McPherson, your leader, Jagmeet Singh, said again today, and he said multiple times that he's not going to play Conservative games, which means he's not going to let Pierre Poilievre determine the timing of the defeat of this government. Mm-hmm. So the NDP is going to get an opposition day at some point on the calendar. I mean, will you bring a vote of non-confidence as a party when you get your opportunity here?
Listen, you know what we're going to keep doing? We're going to keep trying to find ways to get things through that'll help Canadians. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Lamoureux. The rhetoric, the unbelievable misinformation, I'll even say lies that Pierre Poilievre has pulled out in the House nonstop. I mean, we're not listening to this. This is a deeply unserious politician who has not got the interests of Canadians at heart. So for us, we're looking at things like making sure that the pharmacare is coming through, making sure that those programs that are in place are delivered on. We'll continue to work with the government and work with all parties as long as they are working for Canadians. And when they stop doing that, when that stops happening, absolutely. We'll go to the polls.
Is there any scenario, Heather McPherson, where you'd vote non-confidence before pharmacare is through the system, through the Senate, and given royal assent?
I'm gonna say something that you've probably heard many times before. We're gonna look at every single one of the votes as they come, and we're going to decide as a caucus how we choose to vote and whether or not we feel like there's wins for Canadians. I mean, that's what we've said we were going to do. We're an opposition party. That's our job, is to sometimes oppose and sometimes propose, and that's what we're going to do.
But every vote is not a confidence vote, and that's something that's really important to recognize. So when you talk about issues like pharmacare, we do hope that we'll continue to get that support from the Democrats. Last week we had legislation to deal with transferring from a military court to a civilian court. We're expecting all three political parties to vote in favor of that. Mm-hmm. And if we lose some votes on government bills or in private members' hour, that's fine, as long as we all recognize that our primary role inside the House of Commons is to be there to represent Canadians and do things for Canadians, not the political gamesmanship that we're seeing coming from the Conservatives. They're playing that destructive force on the floor of the House of Commons, and that is not healthy for Canadians.
Okay, I take your point that not every vote is a confidence vote, and there is another one coming from the Bloc Québécois, as I understand it, tomorrow, a private member's bill. Not a confidence vote, but pretty much a line in the parliamentary sand, Mr. Lamoureux, and it's on the boost to the old age security that Mr. Blanchet says is a key demand of his to keep this parliament alive. Liberals have voted for this at committee to send the report back to the House, but against it in the House of Commons and not giving it sort of the royal status it needs to be funded. What are you going to do on that private member's vote tomorrow?
Well, what I know is that we actually made an election platform promise to increase 75 plus because of the additional costs through whether it's medications.
What about 65 to 75, Kevin?
Or ability to be able to get that supplementary income. So for that 75 and over, we made a commitment to actually increase it. So we are actually fulfilled a campaign commitment. I see that as a good thing. We'll have to wait and see in terms of what happens in regards to the votes. We all love our seniors. We all want to try to move forward on that. I can think of a number of initiatives that we've taken over the years to support our seniors, and I suspect we will continue to support our seniors in whatever way we can.
But wait and see. I mean, Heather McPherson I maybe has my script because I was going to ask that question. This is the 65 to 74, but just back to Mr. Lamoureux, like we're less than 24 hours from this vote, sir. You must know what you're going to do. This is a $16 billion cost over the next 5 years, should it be implemented. You're right up against that $40 billion ceiling that the finance minister doesn't want to go over to maybe threaten the credit rating. Can you give Mr. Blanchet what he's looking for here? Is it in the fiscal capacity of Canada to do it?
Well, that's something, no doubt, that there's discussions that would be taking place, whether it's with the Minister of Finance, the House leadership team, how something of that nature would even be rolled out. Those are the type of discussions that need to take place, and I would hope and trust that there is some dialogue there. What I know is that I made a commitment during an election platform to do it for 75 and above for a specific reason. And we fulfilled that campaign commitment. What we're looking at is something that's totally new, that's been brought to the table. Yes, Bloc have been talking about it for quite a while now, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yes, I mean, Heather McPherson is not totally new, right? I mean, it's gone through first and second reading, it's gone through committee. But I guess what is new is you're no longer a reliable partner for the Liberals, and Mr. Blanchet is flexing his muscles here in the interest of seniors in Quebec. I mean, where do you think this particular piece of legislation and this $3 billion a year request goes?
I mean, listen, I have been saying from the very beginning, I don't understand why the Liberals refuse to provide services, the same level of support to those that are 65 to 75. Your rent doesn't cost less, your groceries don't cost less. It's a bit of a joke from the Liberals' point of view, if you ask me. I also think that the government of Canada has a responsibility to be fighting for the rights of all seniors, not just seniors in Quebec. So I certainly would hope that the government will be considering this. You know, every single day we're coming into the House and we're thinking about the things that we can do. The Liberals are basically taking everyone else's homework. You know, they didn't want dental care until we forced them to do it. They didn't want pharmacare until we forced it to do it. And we're in a dangerous moment in this country because, first of all, we've got the Liberals that we have to get to do these things as they're the government. But when the Conservatives come in, they've made it very clear they're going to cut all of these programs, including the CBC.
Yes, but on the OAS motion that the Bloc is bringing, I mean, there is a reason it goes up at 75, because often you get to a point of depleted savings for seniors. You're getting around the life expectancy age, where sometimes one partner dies and the other partner is left with fixed costs but declining income. So what is the justification of boosting 65 to 74 in your view, Heather McPherson?
That's not the reality for seniors in this country right now. Mm-hmm. Seniors in this country are all struggling. 65 to 74 are also struggling to be able to pay their rent, to be able to pay for their groceries. The cost of living doesn't change. And you talk about the fact that life expectancy, that's a pretty cynical way for the government to decide how to support people, seniors in this country, is to hope that they don't depend on.
I wasn't presenting that data point as a hope. It is just the actuarial analysis of aid that is required. That I was reading some analysis on this, so I was just putting that out there. There's a reason why.
You, David. I was questioning the Liberals.
It's not from the government, so just so you know that. Go ahead, Kevin Lamoureux.
Yeah, if you take a look at it, retirement funds start to diminish. You can talk in regards to the increase in medical treatments, medications, and so forth. It's recognizing the fact that there are more challenges, in generally speaking, for the 75 plus. And I go back to the fact we made an election promise to do that. So we're just fulfilling that that particular commitment.
Kevin, you should talk to
and the
some people in
reality
my riding.
is that a block of people do need that additional support.
Well, I guess, Heather McPherson, could you means test these increases? I mean, there are people, people are talking about pensions a lot lately on Parliament Hill. There are people who retire with big pensions or have good savings and good income even in retirement. Should they qualify for a boost in OAS and these sorts of things if they really are, even in retirement and on pension income, wealthy?
Listen, we have seen time and time again that the Liberal government has failed to support seniors. We saw that during COVID. We've seen it where they didn't understand that seniors were going to become homeless because they didn't take the action, the steps that were necessary. But you're right, pensions are also at risk. You know, we've seen, I'm an Albertan, you've seen what Danielle Smith and the Conservatives are doing with regards to the CPP. We know Pierre Poilievre has talked about the CPP as a business tax, even though seniors depend upon it. So we're in a situation now where seniors could be getting hit with their pensions being attacked, as well as not having the support they need from the federal government to pay for things like groceries and rent.
But Heather, as much as I like Heather, we got to speak the full truth here. When we first came into government, one of the first actions we took was to dramatically increase the guaranteed income supplement.
Yes,
that
but you didn't do it for 65 to 74.
Yes, we did. Yes, for the guaranteed income supplement, that was an increase. That literally lifted hundreds, going into thousands of seniors out of poverty. During the pandemic, we had the one-time payments for our seniors.
Kevin,
we've had the annual
increases,
supports to senior organizations like Horizon and other nonprofit groups. We have been there, and we will continue to be there for seniors. The dental program, yes, we work together, and I like it when we work together, I must say. We work together to deliver on pharmacare, to deliver on dental care. These are progressive measures that is making a real, tangible difference for our seniors in all regions of our country.
Kevin Lamoureux misses the good old days of July. Heather McPherson, I have a question. I believe you were the author of the private member resolution on the recognition of a Palestinian state. That was the subject of intense negotiations to come up with a compromise wording to allow it to pass through the House of Commons. That was during the Supply and Confidence Agreement and during a different stage of this conflict. You have now written a letter to Melanie Joly saying, get on with it, essentially. Are you prepared to bring another motion like that back to Parliament?
Absolutely. I mean, right now we have written to the minister. The minister, could do this today. There is absolutely no reason for the House to be involved. The minister could recognize the state of Palestine, could sanction Netanyahu and his administration for the crimes that they're committing, and frankly could stop sending weapons through the U.S. to Israel to be used against civilians, against children. And the minister has chosen not to do that. So we'll continue to push on it. But I want to make it very clear, David, we do not need something in the House to do that. When we had the motion in March on this, it was part of a bigger piece of work that we wanted the government to do. But Minister, there's nothing stopping her. I urge her to take that step.
But it was a subject of intense debate because it threatened to fracture the Liberal caucus along pretty significant lines. Should it have come to a vote in its unamended form in the House of Commons? Yeah. It is a wedge that you could play politically on a vote with a party that you say is weak and selfish and needs to go and you're no longer in agreement with. Mm-hmm. So should we anticipate another motion on a declaration of statehood for Palestine or recognition of statehood for Palestine from the NDP?
Listen, I think, David, we're not probably going to broadcast what our opposition days are going to be this far in advance. But just so we are clear, all of those things the Canadian government should do because they frankly align with a policy of two-state solution. They align with our policies to the Arms Trade Treaty. I could go on this and the importance of human rights in Canada's role in the world. So, Mr. Lamoureux, just to give you the last word on that, I mean, is this something you would be prepared to support? Should it come back to Parliament again? I mean, the Minister, the Prime Minister, the ambassadors to the UN have all said they want to recognize an independent Palestinian state at the right time. What the right time is not clear. What are your thoughts?
I think that we have to look at our allied countries, in particular the G7 and the G20, the Five Eyes countries, and work alongside them and see what it is that is in the best interest of ensuring that we're reflecting Canadian values. But I do have a lot of ideas in terms of what opposition motions could be. Yeah, I've spent many years in opposition. Yeah. I love things like the National Food
Pretty sure we won't be taking that advice.
It's a good program. We could talk about that. There's a lot of good things that are actually taking place place. We could talk about inflation. People are concerned about the issue of affordability. There's all sorts of things that we could be talking about. Every vote doesn't have to be a confidence vote. Let's start working for Canadians. Keep our focus.
Well, the Conservatives have 5 of those opposition days this fall, so you might want to give them a ring and see if Andrew Scheer will take your suggestion. I think so too. Kevin Lamoureux, Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader, and Heather McPherson, NDP Foreign Affairs Critic and Party Whip. Thank you both for being here today. I always appreciate the time.
Thanks, David.
Our pleasure.
In his attempt to topple the government today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre made the case for sending Canadians into a carbon tax election.
Here's the existential choice. Do we go to a 61 cent a litre carbon tax, making us among the highest taxed fuel in all of the world? A tax that will grind our economy to a halt, that will force our truckers to leave to the U.S. where there is no carbon tax. Nobody left to bring goods to our grocery store, parts to our factories, jobs to our people. It will be a nuclear winter if this happens.
Now, the Liberals immediately hit back against Poilievre's election pitch, saying the Conservative leader is not telling the truth about their key climate policy.
He's going to make life more affordable for Canadians by taking money away from those people who actually are the poorest people in Canada. How the heck does that deal with an affordability issue? It is simply ridiculous. I would say some of the more recent colorful language that he has been using around things like nuclear winter are simply ridiculous and not becoming of a leader in a major G7 country. They are stupid, and he should know better.
So that's where we are, and that's where we begin today with the Power Panel. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio, Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst, and Émilie Nicolas, who is in person in Ottawa today, is a columnist for Le Devoir. It's good to see you all. Kate, this is an Oppo Day motion to bring down the government, where Pierre Poilievre spelled out all the reasons the Liberals should lose. The Liberals, the Bloc, and the NDP spelled out a bunch of reasons why he shouldn't win.
I was just making the point that from the Conservative perspective, it's only upside because they continue to contrast themselves with the Bloc and especially now with the NDP. It does really underscore the Conservatives' point that for the NDP to rip up the agreement, it's a bit of a stunt because now they're immediately faced 3 weeks later with the opportunity to bring the government down. They won't do it. Sounds like the Liberals are going to allow for more opportunities for that to happen, and that will wedge the NDP in particular even further. So it's upside for the Conservatives. It's a clean-cut motion, and they get that contrast, not just with the Liberals, but also with the NDP and the Bloc.
Somewhere somebody's saying that Mike thing was an attempt to silence the Conservatives, but I swear to you it was not.
You said it, not me.
Michelle, Kate calls what the NDP did a stunt. There's a lot of stunts happening right now in the House of Commons. Oppo Day today, an opposition day for the Conservatives to bring this motion. Apparently another one coming on Thursday. So they get 5 this fall. The Liberals are giving them 2 of them in the first week, which is an interesting tactic by the government House leader to do it this way. What do you make of what's happening here?
Well, you know, politicians are going to politic, I guess. And, you know, Pierre Poilievre was full of hyperbole today, and he was, you know, creating and painting this picture of absolute doomsday and that the world was going to end. You know, I think I've heard a candidate say that before, and he might live south of the border. But, you know, if that's the extreme he wants to go down, then he's clearly doing that. And I think that by going so over the top, and talking so much about himself and the brighter, sunnier days, you know, again, almost Justin Trudeau of 2015, that lie ahead with the Poilievre government. He's given the opposition like an easy pass to not actually support the motion. So they're kind of off the hook, and they can all just talk about that. This is all about Poilievre, and I think it's actually an error because. You know, he was on a bit of a stride in terms of speaking about the government. But you have to do so in a way that you actually look like you're the alternative and that you could become prime minister. I don't know that he showed that today.
It's interesting, Francoise, because it's like everybody came back to Parliament, realized Pierre Poilievre is the front runner, and they're all turning their guns on him in a way they hadn't in previous sessions when it was all directed at the Liberals, right? And he gave that speech to caucus and repeated some of it today, talking about the nuclear winter, malnutrition, mass hunger caused by a carbon tax that will go up by 2030, and even saying today there wouldn't be any truck drivers. But, you know, the NDP have called the Liberals weak and selfish and all these things. I mean, how does anybody support anybody with the rhetorical insult fest we're kind of seeing play out in Parliament?
Well, I do believe strongly that what prompted maybe that even more aggressive, if we can call Pierre Poilievre able to be even more aggressive tone on the announcement of Jagmeet Singh at the time when he broke the agreement with the Liberals, because from the words, and I'm very susceptible to the words that are spoken by our politicians, and maybe I should have learned in the last 20 some odd years that it's not always the case. But when somebody comes out and say it's over, it's finished, it can't work, we cannot trust their words, we cannot this, we cannot that.
Right.
It's almost, it gave maybe that sense to Pierre Poilievre, who always been clear on one thing, he wanted an election yesterday more than tomorrow. And on that aspect, what I think a bit killed his momentum was the Bloc Québécois turning around so fast and saying, we will support the government because finally we can maybe have a bit of leadership in that minority government, and maybe we'll be able to grab a few things, which I'm sure made Pierre Poilievre even more mad than he was before that sortie from Jagmeet Singh. And now it's all out war. The Conservative cannot bring in Parliament any motion that would be bringing something positive to any policy because they want this government down. So they will have to one time, two times, three times, until they use all their 5 motion, say we want an election, we want an election. Right. But at the same time, I would say, to finish that topic on Poilievre, if you want people to vote for you and you're really genuine, don't make me kind of miss Stephen Harper as if he's Mr. Congeniality. Stop calling people names that you need their support to pass your motion. Because right now, there's nothing that prompts me to vote against somebody when that somebody called me names like a sellout or whatever, completely waste of a human space and so on and so forth. So they will have to continue with their motion, but at the same time, maybe tone down the attack against the other opposition parties.
Yeah, even if you agree with someone, it's hard to give them what they want when they're insulting you and calling your names and impugning your motives. It's just, human nature kicks in. But Emily, you normally have this very clear-eyed perspective because you're outside the Ottawa bubble, but you're here inside it today. Yeah. And I don't know if it's polluted your thinking, but what's your view on what's happening
It's been less than 24 hours, so I think I'm still
You're
okay.
okay? All right, good.
I'm still okay.
The symptoms will appear in 48 hours.
Yeah. It's still incubating. I think a couple of things. First, it's really hard to try to pass a motion by insulting the people that you want to pass a motion with. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, it makes me think the motions are an opportunity to take space and time in Parliament to explain what a Conservative government would do and why they want an election. But by calling out, and we had a very peculiar question period just last week when the question period was about questions for the opposition and not for the government, right? And
so it's against the rules, right?
Which is against the rules, indeed. And so once you do that, it makes it hard for the NDP and the Bloc to actually support you. The thing about both the NDP and the Bloc is that they're better off in any minority government than they would be in a majority government. Because as opposition parties, they do have some leeway to negotiate in a minority government. We're right now in a majority government territory for the Conservative if we look at the polls. And so obviously the Bloc Québécois is better positioned with a minority government right now than with a majority. And that's the kind of argument that if Pierre Poilievre wants the support of the Bloc on this, he would need to say, what would I do for you that you are not able to get from the Liberal government. And that is not an argument that he's been making at all. And so that's why all that we're seeing today is pretty tricky politics. And just one last thing in terms of who's coming out for the arguments. The Bloc Québécois was basically happy sleeping under a rock, just living their best Bloc life, essentially, for the last 2 years. And Pierre Poilievre came out at the Conservative convention in Quebec City and started to test attack lines on Yves-François Blanchet then. It's the first time now that you're really, since actually the one in the by-election last year, it's the first time you see Yves-François Blanchet actually taking the time to respond because of the situation now in Parliament. So the NDP and Pierre Poilievre, it's not new that you see this infighting, but for Yves-François Blanchet to actually be saying we don't necessarily want a Conservative government, that's a new addition there. And I don't think anybody else in the House of Commons is ready to take that into consideration when they're making the political calculation.
Yeah, Mr. Blanchet was on the show last week, and he, speaking in his second language, had this great phrase that the Conservatives are always throwing their biceps around, which I thought, but, it made perfect sense. But, Kate, on this point that Emily laid out, if you just apply basic rational self-interest, it is in the Bloc and the NDP's self-interest from a policy achievement perspective to keep this parliament alive, whatever you think of the supply and confidence agreement, because they have a better chance of getting these things. So when does the constant confidence motions that we anticipate from the Conservatives, does that get to a point of diminishing returns or a backfiring for them politically if every day they just show up and say, burn it down, bring it down, bring it down, call the election?
Yeah, I don't think so, because Canadians have really hit their breaking point with their kind of sentiment towards the current government. We have not seen even really a pause in the negative sentiment towards Trudeau. It's just been continuing to go, it's continuing to decline favorability for him. So I don't think that there is much risk in that. They can continue, especially when it comes with the NDP, they can continue to say, listen, Canadians, we have been trying. We've been trying to bring this government down. And the NDP, despite ripping up the agreement, making a big show of it and all their bluster, continue to keep them in power. And that's who the real opposition is, frankly, for the Conservatives at this point. It's the NDP. It's competing in a lot of those ridings where you've got, blue-collar workers that are traditionally NDP voters. So they're going to continue to, it makes the government uncomfortable, sure, but it makes the NDP really uncomfortable when they have to twist themselves into knots over and over again in rapid succession to explain what it is about today that doesn't make it a good day to go to an election. And it might be about name calling. I think it's about their ability to actually fight a decent campaign.
I think it's a lot of things, but in terms of how to make friends and influence people, the insults might be a challenge. So Michelle, on that, I mean, is there any kind of the Conservatives made it very clear. They just want an election, carbon tax, all those issues, loss of faith in this government. But is it worth it to the Bloc and the NDP if they can extract something? This OAS vote, the boost to the old age security that Mr. Blanchet, the finance minister, Deputy Prime Minister Christopher Freeland said today, we're having good conversations about this. Who knows where that's going to go? Is there a potential upside for the other two parties in keeping this afloat if they do get something tangible?
Yeah, for sure there is. They are pretty low in the polls themselves. They're not looking forward to an election. Once the new calendar year starts, you can fundraise again from new people, right? It's a whole new kind of fundraising calendar. And so that is a big block of money for all the parties. But certainly they'll be looking to that for their regular donors, especially who give annually. You go into another calendar year, you get that. I just got to say, I completely disagree with Kate. No surprise, I guess, but there's no polls actually that says that an election should come now, right? There's no polling that says Canadians are demanding an election. And if all the Conservatives talk about is wanting an election, then they're really only talking about themselves and, the new offices that they think that they're going to be able to inhabit and what they, how they want to kind of strut around Ottawa being in power. They're not talking about Canadians. They're not talking about Canadians' needs. And they're certainly not getting and contributing to getting anything done in Parliament. And I think that might leave a bad taste in people's mouth if that's all they do over and over and over again.
Okay, Kate, quick 30 seconds, respond to that, and I got to take a break.
Yeah, I was saying that the polls suggest Justin Trudeau's fortunes have not improved. So the ability for him to make the case to Canadians that he should be sticking around. Conservatives are, I think, pretty well positioned to try and bring the government down because his favorability is not improving in any meaningful way. So I think that they are doing a good job, yes, contrasting, proving themselves as the alternative with the current Liberal government, but also contrasting with the NDP, which again, that's where the accessible voter pool is for the Conservatives. So if you wonder why the name calling and why all the debates with the NDP, it's a small p political play for those votes.
Yeah, and look, the desire for an election, it kind of breaks down with the polls, right? The Conservative universe that it's favored to win, they want an election. Everyone else who looks like they're going to lose, they don't want an election. So, I mean, we'll see when we actually get one, but it's kind of fraught.